Good afternoon. I'm Tatiana Liani from Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and today I will talk to you about Jewish history and the Holocaust in Greek theater. But first, I would like to take a moment to tell you how happy and honored I am to be here with you today, and to thank York University for inviting me. And of course, all the wonderful people at York and City for making this event happen. Tomorrow is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. My hometown, Thessaloniki, also known as Salonika, paid a heavy toll in the Holocaust. 96% of the almost 50,000 Jewish residents were slaughtered at Auschwitz. An eyewitness, the Italian writer Primo Levi, remembers them as follows. Next to us, there is a group of Greeks, those admirable and terrible Jews of Salonika, tenacious, thieving, wise, ferocious, and united, so determined to leave such pitiless opponents in the struggle for life. Those Greeks who have conquered in the kitchens and in the yards, and whom even the Germans respect and the Poles fear. These few survivors from the Jewish colony of Salonika are the repositories of a concrete, mundane, conscious wisdom in which the traditions of all the Mediterranean civilizations blend together. That this wisdom was transferred in the camp into the systematic and scientific practice of theft and seizure of positions and the monopoly of the bargaining market should not let one forget that their aversion to gratuitous brutality, their amazing consciousness of the survival of at least a potential human dignity, made of the Greeks the most coherent national nucleus in Lager, and, in this respect, the most civilized. My talk today is dedicated to the Jews of Thessaloniki, to those who were lost and to those who survived. In this talk, I will be looking at modern Greek works with Jewish characters, and I will attempt to analyze the shift in their image within Greek dramaturgy after the Holocaust. I'll also be taking a look at the particular way the Greek writers of Jewish heritage have made use of their material. I will be looking at modern Greek works with Jewish characters, not as historical figures, such as, for example, Judas, nor will I be looking at theatrical adaptations of novels with Jewish characters. I'm also excluding any works by Greek authors that were not written in Greek, like the works of Sephardic Jews from Thessaloniki written in Ladino, and also plays that were never staged. I'd like to start with a few words about the Jews of Greece. The earliest reference to Jewish presence in Greek territory dates back to the 3rd century before Christ. The earliest Jews of Greece were Greek-speaking Romagnotes, who spoke their own dialect, Helleno-Judaic, and wrote in Greek with a Hebrew alphabet. At the end of the 15th century, 200 years after the expulsion of all Jews from the Kingdom of England, tens of thousands of Jews were forced to flee Spain. Those Jews who spoke Ladino are known as Sephardi. The Hebrew word Sepharad means Spain, and many of them fled to territories of the Ottoman Empire, which had not long before conquered the entirety of Greek lands. They set themselves up in the metropolitan centers, including Constantinople and chiefly Thessaloniki. The Ottomans welcomed the Jews because they improved the economy, and Jews occupied administrative posts and played an important role in intellectual and commercial life throughout the empire. Thessaloniki became a haven of religious tolerance for Jews fleeing the Spanish Inquisition and other persecution in Europe. These immigrants established the city's first printing press, and the city became known as a center for commerce and learning. The exile of other Jewish communities swelled the city's Jewish population until Jews were the majority population in 1519. In the next centuries, the Jewish community reached a cultural, economic, and commercial peak, and the Jews called Salonika Madre de Israel. It's important to underline that Salonican Jews didn't consider themselves Greek, but rather subjects of the Ottoman Empire, and it wasn't until the 1920s that they began to be Hellenized. In 1912, when Thessaloniki was united with Greece, the city's Jews represented a full 40% of the population, 60,000 people, when the Greek Christians numbered only about 40,000. The Jews of Thessaloniki occupied places throughout the social ladder, from wealthy entrepreneurs to dock workers. They distinguished themselves for their multidimensional cultural identity, their manifold economic activities, and the active role they played in European and Balkan networks, including the Alliance Israel Universelle, the Zionist movement, and the Federación Socialista Laboradera. After the Asia Minor catastrophe in 1922 and the exchange of populations between Greece and Turkey that followed, about 130,000 refugees from Asia Minor, especially from the city of Smyrna, took up residence in Thessaloniki. A great degree of competition developed between, on the one hand, the city's Jews, and on the other, the new refugees, primarily due to the fact that both groups were traditionally and successfully involved in trade. In June 1931, nationalist refugees set fire to the Jewish quarter Campbell in Thessaloniki, leaving 2 dead and causing extensive property damage. An anti-Semitic sentiment swelled in Europe, and Greece was no exception. Many Jews of Thessaloniki chose to immigrate, primarily to France and Palestine. In 1941, when the Germans occupied Greece, there were about 70,000 Jews living in Greece. 50,000 of them, the great majority, were living in Thessaloniki, where they made up about 20% of the population of the city, despite accounting for only 1.2% of the total population of Greece. Greece lost 88% of its Jewish population in the Holocaust, one of the highest rates in Europe. Thessaloniki, the Jerusalem of the Balkans, paid an even heavier toll. Of the 50,000 Jews of the city who were sent to Auschwitz, only 1,700, fewer than 4%, survived. The homes and fortunes of the exiled Jews were plundered by collaborators of the Germans. Synagogues, cemeteries, and Jewish community libraries were pillaged, and many works of art were destroyed. The Jewish cemetery of Thessaloniki, the largest cemetery in the Balkans, was demolished, and the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, where I teach, was built over it. The tombstones were used to pave streets and were built into Christian churches and the city's theater, and even swimming pools belonging to German occupiers. About 560 Greek Jews were saved thanks to Archbishop Damaskinos and the chief of Athens police, Angelos Everg, who organized the issuance of false identity documents. 1,000 Jews survived by escaping into the mountains, where they fought alongside leftist guerrilla soldiers. Thanks to the Greek resistance movement, another 2,000 managed to escape to neutral Turkey. Some Jews were hidden by Christian classmates, co-workers, neighbors, or nuns, but they were few in number. A glance at the list of the righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem indicates that the number of Christians who saved Jews in Greece was low, in particular in Thessaloniki, where a combination of factors led to the exceptionally high rate of their extermination. First, a sort of geographic destiny. Thessaloniki was from the beginning part of the 1/3 of Greece under German occupation. The Italians, who occupied Athens until 1943, often let the Jews slip through the cracks. Furthermore, Thessaloniki wasn't near any mountains where at least the youth could have escaped to join the guerrilla fighters. Second, the Jewish community of Thessaloniki was more difficult to save because it was so large, 50,000 people compared to that of Athens, which was only 3,000. Because of its large size, the community was dense and self-governing, and its members, especially the eldest, were less easily assimilated. The Jews of Thessaloniki had only been included in the Greek state for 30 years at that point, and many didn't even speak Greek, only Ladino and, in some cases, French. This made it harder for them to hide, since their accent gave them away immediately. Finally, it's a fact that Christians who hid Jews were liable to suffer extreme reprisals, and the German occupation was already extraordinarily harsh for the Greek Christians, who were absorbed by their own suffering. Let us not forget that almost 100,000 Greek civilians died during the occupation from starvation alone. The very few Jews who survived and returned to their homes found themselves often faced with the complete indifference and unwillingness of their Christian neighbors to return their belongings to them, a phenomenon that was not unique to Greece, of course, but rather was common to most of the occupied European states. Many Greek Jews chose to start a new life in newly formed Israel, and so from the 1950s until today, the number of Jews in Greece has shrunk to only 5,000, with only 1,000 of them in Thessaloniki, where 2 synagogues continue to operate alongside a single Jewish primary school and a Jewish museum. The Jewish history of the city has been continuously silenced for about 60 years, both in public rhetoric and in school textbooks. I have personally witnessed the fact that post-war generations remained ignorant that the city in which they grew up was once a multicultural, cosmopolitan city where Jews set the tone for 100 years. For this difficult memory to surface, it took several persistent historians and scholars and an open-minded mayor, Yannis Boutaris, the first mayor of Thessaloniki, to refer specifically and repeatedly to the city's Jewish past, enraging the far right and not hesitating to wear the Jewish kippah at the groundbreaking of the Holocaust Museum in 2018, where he spoke the following words. Who in 1945 grieved their vanished neighbors? What monuments did they raise? What memorial services did they hold? The community alone, bloodied and in rags, fought to resurrect its own existence, to mourn its dead. The city, society, the country entire were indifferent. They feigned ignorance. They pretended not to know what had happened, who had done it, who had helped, who had protected when others, many, many others, had torn down, burned, stolen, occupied the homes and belongings of the many missing and the few remaining. The funeral wail was solitary. On the contrary, the spreading of anti-Semitism was a collective phenomenon, and most attacks were traditionally linked with the Black Libel, an anti-Semitic myth that first appeared in Norwich, England in 1144 and spread rapidly throughout Europe, leading to persecution and pogroms against Jewish communities. According to the Black Libel myth, before Passover, Jews would kidnap a Christian child and put him in a barrel of nails to extract his blood for the preparation of traditional unleavened bread. The Black Libel occupies a prominent position in the 3 oldest Greek plays with Jewish characters. 3 plays which, despite having been written in different eras, 1830, 1909, 1938, still share some important features, as all 3 take place in the island of Zakynthos, also known as Zante. Basil was an innovative and enlightened play for its time. Dimitris Pathis holds that it would be difficult to find any other modern Greek dramatic texts that comprises such an anthology of the ideas that the French Revolution stood up. So how then is the image of the Jew presented in this play, which tells the story of an aristocratic girl who is seduced and impregnated by a young man from the so-called second houses, and which her despotic father refuses to accept? In the form of the clever comical Jewess, who is drafted into saving the day with her filters. It's no coincidence that the Jew is only referred to by her actual name of Banzardot twice in the play, calls to mind Shylock, whom everyone calls simply the Jew. This dehumanization of the other in the form of the erasure of his or her unique features, like a name, comprises an established tactic of anti-Semitic speech. There are many stereotypical images in the play: the association between Jews and magic, as Banzardot prepares and sells magic potions, the greed of the Jews and their obsession with profit, as Banzardot's friend Simicha charges interest, and the stereotypical image of taking advantage of Christians, as Banzardot secretly takes money from both the girl's mother and her lover, betraying their trust. Despite the many anti-Semitic stereotypes, Banzardot is a sympathetic comic character, and the play includes numerous references to Christian attacks on Jews. We can't make it through a day without them beating our children, even our elders. They throw foul things at us. They pelt us with stones, says Banzardot. The Christians don't only hustle us in the streets, they come into our very homes and beat us. Last Easter, they found a little boy drowned on the beach, and they dove holes through his hands and feet, and then took him into the castle, screeching about how the Jews had crucified him, looking for any reason to attack the ghetto and to plunder it. This is a direct reference to the pogrom of 1712, when the discovery of 5-year-old Ioannis Zervos, dead, led to accusations of blood libel and attacks. The ghettos Banzardot mentions were present only in the Ionian Islands, which were under Western rule. There were no ghettos in the rest of Greece. Grigorios Xenopoulos' play Rachel also refers to the 1712 pogrom, although it is set in 1891, the year of the second Zakynthine pogrom. In Xenopoulos' play, which deals with the love of Rachel, the daughter of the well-loved and liberal-minded Jewish banker Tedesco, for the Christian Carolus Desilas, son of an equally wealthy neighboring Christian family, the stereotypes seem to be appended, at least in the beginning. The two families are united by enduring friendship and mutual respect, and anti-Semitic prejudices seem to be limited to the lower, populist, uneducated strata of society. Here, the exchange between the Christian servant Areti with the Jewish servant Abraham is demonstrative. She directly accuses the Jews of stealing Christian children to extract their blood for their unleavened bread. On the contrary, the Tedescos and the Desilas consider that they now live in a time and in a society where bigotry belongs to the past. The truth is that all of us here, we are all Greeks, Greek citizens. The difference is that Mr. Desilas follows the religion of Christ and we follow the religion of Moses, as Rachel's brother puts it. All the characters seem convinced that the 180 years that have passed since the last Jewish pogrom have brought such changes to society that such passions could never be stirred up on Zakynthos. Rachel, who studied in Switzerland, her elderly father, who rarely goes to synagogue and doesn't keep kosher, and the fully assimilated younger son, Alexander, comprised typical children of the era of European Jewish assimilation in the liberal 19th century, when, for a little while, the Jews appeared fully integrated into their respective countries. And so Rachel is determined to be baptized as a Christian in order to marry Carolus. But then her father is banned from his club for his own protection, and the next day he comes home with his head bloodied from a stone, as the Christians have started vandalizing Jewish homes. It is at this point that Rachel re-identifies as a Jew and aligns herself with her older brother, the only true Israelite, according to the others, who warned from the start that they should avoid getting too close to the Christians. I am a Jew, worse than all the Jews. All the Jews together don't add up to a single Rachel in hatred and fanaticism, she below said Carolus. In a single day, the fragile balance and trust that seemed to have developed between the Jews and the Christians has collapsed. It turns out that her father, in spite of his supposed trust in the Christians, had buried a box full of money in the cellar, yet another stereotypical image of the Jews, while Mrs. De Silla attacks Rachel, calling her a dirty Jew. Your wealth, she says, your beauty, your upbringing add up to nothing. You are always contemptible. You're from a race that we never took seriously, neither your men nor your women, beyond condescension and politeness. In the end, religious and cultural differences prove much stronger than class differences that seemed, at the start of the play, to hold more sway than religious ones. Very demonstrative is the point where not only Carolus, but even Rachel mock the impoverished Jews they feared as children. Carolus says, a Jew to me was a penniless man who carried a brush over his shoulder and carded hair for mattresses. I remember an old man, ugly, short, bent over. I believe that he used the nails of his carding brush to poke holes in children, because if I didn't sit still, my mother used to threaten that she would hand me over to the Jew. Rachel responds, what about the old Jewish women with the pleated kerchiefs and those dreadful carpet beaters? Even I was afraid of them. The play ends with Rachel throwing herself between Carolus and her brother, who, enraged, shoots him but kills her. The curtain falls to shouts from the street of Christian attacking Jews. Get them, shoot them, revenge, death, blood, death, get them. In Xenopoulos' work, Jews appear for the first time as equal players on the social field, with the writer condemning in no uncertain terms the anti-Semitic attacks. As for anti-Semitic stereotypes, while they recur often in the text, they are in part undermined. In contrast to Xenopoulos, Dionysius Romas, in his play, Zakynthia Serenade, seems to adopt the most anti-Semitic stereotypes entirely uncritically. The characters come from the lower class, and so while it is set in the same era as Rachel, the pretexts of tolerance for diversity are absent. The Jew is the other, the foreigner, and this becomes apparent from the state's directions themselves, which note, appears a typical Jewish head, mean, with a hooked nose and a goatee. This play is another tragic love story about a Christian man, the barber Tsakasianos, and a Jewish girl ready to convert for him, named Emma. The barber loves Emma, but loathes her Jewish heritage. I'm sorry that I met you, beautiful as a statue, in the filthy ghetto with Jews, slime, and dogs. Although Emma is depicted with sympathy and pity, the same cannot be said for the other Jewish characters, from the repulsive rabbi with a red goatee to the ghetto's usurer Samulis Bolis, who apparently drinks your soul's blood for his dinner and blackmails the barber, thus driving now deflowered Emma to a tragic, if romantic, death. It's worth noting that both Emma and Rachel fit into the long tradition in Western literature that has beautiful Jewish girls falling in love with Christians and wanting to convert, like Jessica in The Merchant of Venice and Abigail in The Jew of Malta. In relation to this trope, it has been suggested that since in the Jewish religion, Jewishness is matrilineal, Jewish women represent the possibility of proselytization. It is at any rate very interesting that in the year 1938, while the Jews were being persecuted in the most violent way in Germany and Austria, Romas writes a play that makes use of the most tired anti-Semitic stereotypes wholly uncritically. And it's equally interesting that this mediocre play was staged at the National Theatre in Athens and awarded with the National Theatre Award that same year. It must be said, of course, that the use of anti-Semitic stereotypes does not necessarily mean that the writer espoused them, as Romas, for example, is known to have later helped Jews during the German occupation. However, all three plays we've looked at give a characteristic picture of the position of the Jew in Greek society before the Second World War, and are entirely indicative of how strong prejudices and stereotypes about Jews were in pre-war Greece. To conclude with the Zakynthia plays, it is important to stress that the Zakynthia put to rest the shadows of the two anti-Jewish attacks of the 18th and 19th centuries, when they hit and saved all 296 Jews living on the island during the German occupation, making Zakynthos the only place in Greece with no Holocaust deaths. The watershed experience of the Holocaust comprises, in a sense, a natural boundary between Jewish-themed plays written before and after the Second World War. How does one write about the Jews after the Holocaust? And how does one write about the Holocaust itself? The inability of playwrights to handle such a massive collective trauma is demonstrated in the bibliography of Holocaust dramatic literature by Alvin Goldfarb. With the exception of Israel, every other country took until the 1960s to see any plays about the Holocaust stage. Rolf Hochhuth's Deputy in 1963, Arthur Miller's Incident at Vichy in 1964, Peter Weiss' The Investigation in 1965. Likewise, in Greece, the first notable play with Jewish interest in the post-war period also dates to the 1960s, written in this case by a Greek Jew, which is no coincidence because, as we're about to see, non-Jewish Greeks take another 60 years to treat the subject of the Holocaust. The play, The Huts, is an allegory in one act by Manthos Crispis from 1960. Crispis was a Romagnol Jew born in the Greek city of Volos, who survived the occupation hiding in Athens. The Huts has continuous Jewish references which were completely overlooked by the audience at the time. The plot is as follows. Stephanos and Christina are two young people in love, but they are kept apart by their huts. Christina wears a beret and belongs to the governing elite, whereas Stephanos wears a flat cap and belongs to the persecuted. The characters in the play are required to wear their hats at all times, and anyone who removes it is executed, exactly as outlined in the Nuremberg laws. Stephanos is proud of his hat. It's the oldest in the world, he points out, a clear reference to the Jewish faith, the oldest monotheistic religion in the world. Stephanos refuses to change hats, to convert, in other words, to save his life, and is arrested and evacuated to an unknown destination. In the final scene of the play, a year later, the beret wearers have lost power, and Stephanos convinces Christina to throw the hats away since they are what divide people. It is particularly interesting and demonstrative of the ignorance and indifference of post-war Greece at the fate of the 50,000 Greek Jews who were exiled, that not a single theater critic picked up on Crispis' allegory, despite the fact that the headlines were dominated at the time by the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem. All critics read the hats as ideological rather than religious or cultural symbols. Gerasimus Stavro, for example, mocks the author for his naivete in believing that it's the hats which divides industrialists from workers, so often the mode to put an end to all social conflict. Perhaps it was this total misinterpretation of his play's meaning that drove Crispis, in his next one-act play, The Half-King, 3 years later, to speak openly about Jewish identity in a surrealist play based on his personal experience during the occupation when 3 of his classmates blackmailed him. In the play, we see Aris, owner of a shop specializing in chess sets, set upon more and more by three mysterious visitors. We see Ari's constant fear, the lies he is forced to tell his beloved Mika, like, for example, that the name Aris is derived from the Greek name Aristides rather than from the Jewish Aaron. His passionate denial when Mika tells him that she has heard that he's a Jew. Lies, lies, slander. My name is Aris, Aristides. It's a lie, a lie. At the end, Aris admits to Mika that he is a Jew, looking at his reflection in the mirror, saying, "How ugly I am, Mika. That's why no one likes me." The three visitors arrest him for cutting the White King from an ivory chess set in half, and they inform him that the trial will be swift and neat, and his execution irreproachable. The critics once again overlooked Crispy's point and noted that the totalitarian ideologies of our age are here the primary target again. Only one critic, Cleon Parassos, understood Crispy's reference to the Holocaust, speaking of a tremendous play, clearly unparalleled, that we have already seen nonetheless many, many times on the stage, which makes us wonder which place he's talking about, since in 1963, the Holocaust was utterly cloaked in oblivion in Europe and in Greece alike, with a total misinterpretation of Crispy's play, perhaps the greatest proof of that. Robert Antelme, in the prologue of his book The Human Race, contemplates the situation faced by the survivors when they return. Finally, they could speak. Finally, they could be heard. But people refused to listen. Soon, to the survivors themselves, to the victims who still bore wounds and scars, what had happened began to seem unreal, even for those who had lived through the unreal. Manthos Crispis, after the half-king, gave up writing altogether at the age of only 38. He spent the next 40 years of his life working only on translation. The Greek indifference to the Jewish fate is also demonstrated by the fact that, with the exception of the two plays by Crispis, the only other two plays with Jewish characters written after World War II and before the 21st century appear to continue the tradition of stereotypical anti-Semitic depiction, as if the Holocaust had never happened at all. In Roma's 1958 play, Casanova on Corfu, we found yet another repulsive Jewish lender, Samoulis, based on the lender in Zakynthine surname and bearing even the same name. The 1968 play, Eleonora's Good Heart, is of greater interest. Supposedly authored by John Cromstyle and translated and directed by the famous actor seen here, Dimitris Horn, who was in fact the author, the play features two Jews, father and son, who are both businessmen, naturally, upholding the stereotype clever businessmen. It's no coincidence that they say that the Jews are geniuses. They damn well are, is the final line of the play. The two Jews keep Simon, the sympathetic but unlucky hero, tied up in and exploited by an overbearing contract that recalls Shylock's bond. According to this contract, Simon has undertaken the obligation to present a television show in which he must appear disguised as a respectable elderly woman called Eleonora, who gives advice to her audience. When Simon, at wit's end, utters the words "dirty Jews," the father retorts with a speech that directly references Shylock's famous speech, "Hath not a Jew eyes?" "What does that mean? Explain to me," says the father. "You work, don't you? You have interests of your own that you advance, don't you? Don't you benefit from the sweat of another? Don't you yearn for the extinction of your neighbor for your own personal interest? What have you held onto from your Lord's word? Go ahead, tell me. Did he teach you to trample your oaths, to lie, to be in dishonor? We may have lived as orphans, stateless, for so many centuries, but you have left an orphan him who has crucified for you. This is the last Greek play with Jewish characters staged in the 20th century, and of course the presence of Jewish lenders and exploiters on the Greek stage even after the Holocaust demonstrates not only the deep roots of anti-Semitic stereotypes, but also a scandalous ignorance of the European discussion of anti-Semitism and collective responsibility that was going on at the time in Western Europe. In 2002, almost 60 years after the genocide of the Greek Jews, the first realist Greek play making reference to the Holocaust was finally brought to the stage. It was Michalis Repas and Thanasis Papathanasiou's comedy The Stork Brings the Babies, based on the script of the Czech film Stories of Division and Pregnancy. Repas and Papathanasiou moved the action from Prague to Thessaloniki and add a few characters and Greek touches. The story is as follows. In 1943, in a two-story house in Thessaloniki, lived two infertile couples. Upstairs are Lela and Vangelis, who cooperate with the Germans, and downstairs are Christina and her husband Mimis. One day, a Jew who has escaped from Auschwitz, for whom the Germans are searching, shows up at Christina and Mimis' flat. Terrified, they hide him in the cellar. When the upstairs neighbors come in to look for him, the following dialogue takes place. Vangelis: a Jew in our neighborhood is like an unexploded bomb. Don't you get it? He might have killed a German and there could be retaliation. Lela: how is he going to kill a German? With what? Vangelis: I'm telling you, I saw him myself. He was massive, like a wild beast. Lela: right, okay, a real-life warlord. Vangelis: he had this wild mustache and his eyes. Lela: oh yeah? Did he have tusks too? Vangelis: now that I didn't notice. Of course, here the writers are playing with the stereotype of the Jew as the terrifying other, undermining that with the pathetic appearance of Jacob, who had appeared just before, emaciated and exhausted on stage, describing Auschwitz to his saviors. You can see him here with his striped uniform. In this earliest reference to the extermination camps in all of modern Greek dramatic literature, Jacob describes how the Germans told the Jews that they were going to forced labor camps and describes the stench of burnt flesh that they inhaled as they alighted from the train cars. He described the torture and humiliation they suffered and how he ended up beaten and unconscious in a crate in a moving train with a note in his pocket that read, "Try to leave. Leave and tell them what you saw." He got off in Thessaloniki and managed to make it to the home of his saviors, which, as it turns out, was his own home, which the Germans had given to their Greek collaborators like all Jewish property. After a series of unlikely events, Jacob is drafted into getting Christina pregnant with the blessing of her husband, the sterile Mimis. Although the play is a comedy through and through, the writers took advantage of the opportunity to feature the still unknown torment of the Jews in Greece. If God has an excuse for all of this, it is simply that he does not exist. Where was God in the train cars? How deaf is this God? How could he not hear the screams in the chambers? My father and my brother Maurice were in the same chamber. When the Germans realized that it was father and son, they played one of their usual games. They gave my brother a plaque and said, "If you want to live, you must kill your father." And then our father fell to his knees and begged my brother, "Hit me, Maurice, hit me, my child." And Maurice tried to hit him as hard as he could to minimize his suffering. Once again, the reviews are revealing. With the sole exception of a film critic, Panagiotis Timogiannakis, who noted that the play brings the Greek Jews to the Greek stage as a comedic theme, yet Greek theater has barely ever featured Jews at all, not a single one of the numerous positive to encomiastic reviews in the press ever mentions the Jewish element of the play, despite it introducing here for the first time after 60 years the matter of the Holocaust to the Greek theater. Critics interpreted the play as a successful, pure-blooded Greek comedy and ignored the clear desire of the writers to sensitize their audience to a topic that electrified them, as they explicitly state in the program, which was handed out to the critics. The first page notes that only 4% of the Jewish population of Thessaloniki survived the Holocaust, and the program also included testimonies from the concentration camps and an extensive bibliography of historical texts, studies, and autobiographical memoirs. Following in the footsteps of Repas and Papathanasiou 11 years later, 2013, Petros Nakos adapted the Italian black comedy by Gianni Clementi, the Jew, moving the action from Rome to 1945 Thessaloniki. The plot revolves around a couple, Asimina and Haralambos, who live in their former boss' flat. The boss, who, as is typical, is never named, was a Jew who was forced to sign over his property to them 13 years earlier at the time of his exile. They think that they see him in front of the house and panic. Asimina is furious and determined to hold on to the property. They made soap out of all those Jews, but this one got away? Looks like their Führer had a point. That little mustache was onto something. When Asimina, in an attempt to get her way, tells her husband that the Jew raped her, at first he struggles to believe it since the Jew was known to be gay. But eventually he's convinced, and they decide to kill the unwelcome visitor. That filthy wretch, says Haralambos, that old creep doesn't deserve to live. The Jew, who in the play is referred to by his employee beneficiaries by every anti-Semitic stereotype, dog, pig, cheapskate, trusted no one, wouldn't give water to a dying man, usurer. In the end, as it proves, he had never actually returned, and in the final scene, the couple, in a twist, kills their own daughter by mistake. From the program, we can conclude that, as in the case of Repas and Papathanasiou, it made a strong impression on Nakas when he realized just how ignorant he had been with regard to the Greek Jews, and he turned to the relevant scholarly literature which he wanted to share with his audience. As such, he included in the program an extensive list of references, acknowledgements, and informative texts about the Jews of Thessaloniki, and especially about Law 205, which permitted Greek Christians to take possession of the property of their exiled Jewish neighbors. Thessaloniki native Thanasis Triaridis represents a notable exception in Greek theater. His entire unorthodox writing career has sought to overturn myths, treating unpleasant subjects that his compatriots were in no way prepared to hear about, from the slaughter wrought by Greek General Kolokotronis during the Greek War of Independence to the banning of the Slavic Macedonian language by the Greek authorities. The Holocaust comes up repeatedly in his works. Claude Schumacher has said that the successful dramatic work or performance about the Holocaust is one which upsets rather than comforts, that offers no solutions. It is one that leaves the spectator in turmoil, wanting to learn more, despite realizing that no amount of knowledge will free him from that turmoil. It must be a play that leaves its audience stunned. If that's the goal, Triaridis achieves it with the two plays with extensive Jewish references, the narrative dialogues Mengele and Zyklon or Destiny. In Mengele, written in 2012, a man, M, and a young woman, E, who is writing her thesis on Mengele, meet in a train and decide to play a game to pass the time. He will play Mengele and she will play Esther Cohen, one of the victims of his twin experiments, a Jewish girl from Thessaloniki who survived because he fell in love with her. The boundaries of this game are hard to detect, and the viewer loses track of where the lie ends and the truth begins. This play introduces a rhetorical strategy which Triaridis will use again in Zyklon, where through the use of pointed question and answer, many shocking aspects of the Holocaust are revealed to the audience. He injected the pupils of the children's eyes, says Esther, because he wanted to change their color. I didn't know that. Esther, he removed vital organs from the children to see how long they could survive without them, or he would infect them with fatal bacteria to try a variety of antidotes. I didn't know that he did such things. Esther, he tried to fertilize women with mouse sperm. He stitched together the livers of twin children to turn them into conjoined twins. In his 2013 play, Cyclone, a man, O, and a woman, D, participate in a television game show called Cyclone, where they are back-to-back in a capsule alone. When O realizes that D doesn't know anything about Cyclone, he asks her, "So have you ever heard anything about Auschwitz?" D, very irritated and offended, "Of course I have. They exterminated millions there." O, "This is the gas they used to kill them, Cyclone B." D, "I was sure that they burned them in ovens. That's why we talk about the crematoria." Oh, yes, a lot of people make that mistake. They use the ovens, the crematoria, to cremate the already dead bodies. But they killed the people first in gas chambers with Cyclone B. They put them naked into the showers, closed the doors, and released the gas through air ducts. And then, after a bit, they had to collect the bodies. D, clearly offended. "Well, thank you very much for the lesson, but you have no right to talk down to me because I didn't know the exact procedure of their slaughter. I've read books about Auschwitz, I've seen films and documentaries, and the newsreels where they shovel up the bodies." But soon this anger dissipates and she asks for more and more details of how the killing was carried out at Auschwitz, how many Jews were put into the gas chambers, the rate of death. A fully evidenced analysis of the extermination camps and their functioning is put on display for the reader or viewer in this play, where, once again, the boundary between reality and fantasy is fluid as the two, trapped in the capsule, begin to make up scenarios for each other, filling out various realities. The D is a Jew who grew up in a Jewish orphanage and elected to be on the show in order to commit suicide publicly in protest at the Holocaust. Or that the O is a terrorist who got on the show to blow up all the participants on the air. Triaridis wants to make up for the indifference of Greece and especially Thessaloniki towards the Jews who were not only lost but also forgotten. "I really wanted to state Cyclone in Thessaloniki," he says in an interview. "If I were a religious man, I would call it a vow. To me, Thessaloniki is the city of the disappeared citizens, of their disappeared memory. If the Nazis annihilated our neighbors, we, the Greeks, annihilated their memory." Like Repas and Nakos plays, Triaridis' works are also accompanied in their print format by informational material about Greek Jews, testimonies, references, as well as filmography on the Holocaust. But Triaridis' plays stand apart from those that came before because he refuses to make even a subtle reference to anti-Semitic stereotypes, and because of a deep knowledge of the subject matter. By way of comparison, Repas and Papathanasiou have their Jacob arriving all the way to Greece from Poland, still wearing his striped Auschwitz uniform. In 2017, Leonard, a Salonican Jew, descendant of Holocaust survivors, premiered his one-act play, I Have Never Forgotten You, at the National Theatre in Thessaloniki. From the composition of the play, it's clear that he considers it his responsibility, his vow perhaps to use Triaridis' term, to keep alive the memory not only of those who were lost, but of their traditions, stories, and songs, and to approach, I quote, right-wing, unversed people who had no idea what happened in their city during the occupation or after it. There is therefore a thoroughgoing didactic dimension to Nar's work, which becomes clear from the plot itself, which gives the writer the opportunity to unfold the history of the Jews in Thessaloniki for his audience. A young man, a third-generation immigrant to the United States, returns to Thessaloniki at the behest of his grandmother to accompany her to a family reunion. The grandmother's memories, as well as a documentary that he decides to make, comprise the opportunity for a retelling on stage of the most important moments in Jewish history in Thessaloniki, and many Sephardic songs. The plot then is the pretext for a local history lesson. However, it is interesting to note that there is only one reference to the horror of the camps in the whole play. On the contrary, and despite the fleeting reference to Grandma's 29 dead relatives, the writer chooses to dwell on rescue stories. He later stated in an interview that he wanted to avoid the melodramatic. In the total blackness of extermination, he notes, I wanted life to hold sway. Those who lived had to live over the sake of those who were killed. Clearly, Nar's choice to focus on life rather than death has perhaps something to do with a particular kind of self-censorship I detect in the works of the Greek Jews. Crispus and then Nar intentionally avoid making the survivors of the extermination camps into heroes in their works. In the same way, David Crespi, descendant of Jews of Thessaloniki, chooses to set his Salonican Jewish trilogy in 1880, 1930, and 1950, rejecting the perhaps more dramatically effective, obvious choice of depicting the exile of 1943. If we consider how Crispy's play was received and the results of a 2014 study on anti-Semitism that showed that 65% of Greeks think that the Jews exploit the Holocaust, it's not hard to understand the reluctance of Greek Jewish playwrights to use the genocide as a literary theme. This may be a form of self-censorship, whereby they seek to avoid the charge that they are exploiting their own collective trauma. Back to Thessaloniki, just a couple of months ago, a play that doesn't belong in this overview since it's an adaptation of a novella by Rika Benveniste, premiered in Thessaloniki, directed by Damianos Konstantinidis. The story of Luna, a poor seamstress who returned from Auschwitz, immediately became the talk of the town and was constantly sold out, proving the enormous shift in the climate in Thessaloniki and the popularity of a subject that was taboo only a few years earlier. It took quite a few decades for the Holocaust of Greece to be written down. And then, in the 21st century, there was an ever-burgeoning explosion of studies, fictional narratives, documentaries, theater plays, and monuments that take up the interpretation, the review, and the contemplation of this watershed experience. Evaluating the findings from our overview today, I think we can draw some conclusions. It's clear that anti-Semitic stereotypes have been widespread in Greek society as well, and this fact is reflected in modern Greek dramaturgy. The image of the Jew that we find in this plays, is entirely identical to the anti-Semitic stereotypes of Western Europe. Many Jews in pre-war Greek theater were money-grabbing, exploitative, usurious, unworthy of trust, dirty people with a hooked nose and repulsive appearance who tried to hurt Christians. Rather than a positive turning point in the depiction of Jews in the Greek theater, the Holocaust instead represented their disappearance from it. Of course, the absence of Jews from Greek theater and the silence of Greek writers about the Holocaust belongs to the wider oblivion politic that held sway after the Second World War, despite the few testimonies of Greek Jews that managed to find their way into print. Even on a scholarly level, the subject only began to be treated by scholars at the tail end of the 20th century, much later than in the rest of Europe. According to Yorgos Bramas, this is due to memory competition. After the Greek Civil War ended in 1949, thousands of the dead were silenced by censorship and official state policy, leaving no space for tears grieving anyone else. 20 years ago, Effie Vafiadi wrote, "In the history of the theater, often an absence means more than a presence." The researcher is taken aback by the fact that in the modern Greek theater, the image of the Jew is exceptionally faint, despite the Jewish element having existed in the past as a most significant portion of the residents of Greek land. The production of the past 20 years has come to utterly overturn that image. And yet, in the theatrical works of the 21st century, we can detect a distinct change from earlier works. The presence of Jews is now motivated. The Jew is no longer just another character in a play, but he is the nucleus of the play, the reason that the play is being written. Thus, just in a new way, he is still the other, in this case as a sort of exhibit, which is yet another proof of his difference. Either in the appearance of the known stereotypes, even for the sake of overturning them, like in the case of Nakas, or in the careful avoidance of the appearance of any stereotypes, as in the case of Triaridis, the Jew in 21st century Greek theater is not a mere literary construct, but the bearer of a horrible truth that writers want to share with their audiences. It is into this frame that the constant cramming of quotes, photographs, facts, and references to Greek Jews and the Holocaust into these post-2000 plays programs fits. In any case, I think that we can close today's presentation with an optimistic observation. Jews are no longer absent from Greek theater, from the theater of a country where they have lived and flourished for over 2,000 years. Slowly but surely, the veil of oblivion has been lifted, and the silence of decades has been shattered. Thank you very much.